pouring concrete, doing concrete work. We were over on the Oklahoma-Texas state line, and we were working for a great big ranch over there. And we had gotten out well before the sun came up to pour a driveway for a huge ranch house. And we had poured roughly 40 yards of concrete, and we had just about finished it up, and the framers had showed up right about little after daybreak, and they started saying that a plane had hit the World Trade Centers, and what's this about? What's going on? And we got on the radio. Of course, we're on the Oklahoma-Texas state line, and so there wasn't a whole lot of radio to be heard, but we found, one of the AM radio stations that was primarily news, and just trying to figure out if this was an accident, if this was on purpose. You guys probably can all recall where you were on that day. But whenever I got home that day, I turned the TV on, and I saw all of the images that everybody had seen all day long, that I didn't get the opportunity to see until that evening. And I remember that afternoon going, man, something's got to be done about this. And I thought, what could I do? I've never had a desire to go to New York City or any of that. And so I went to Amarillo and was contemplating, what to do. And I wound up going into a recruiter's office on September the 11th, 2001, and just, talking about the options. It's interesting because most people, when they join the military, they're 18, they're out of high school. I was about 22 or 23 years old. I had already given up. I had already not considered the military. I considered it enough to say, that's not for me. But once it hit on our soil, I decided I needed to do something. So I joined the military, went to basic training in October of 2001, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I got to rake lots of leaves and shovel lots of snow at basic training. And then I was stationed at Fort Hood early 2002. I was there for almost a year, and then we got deployed to Iraq. Our unit was the first unit in the military to get GPS, and they had been training all of our equipment with GPS. And so when the war broke out, our unit was the ones that they wanted to send in there to test out the GPS system and see how it worked and all of that kind of thing. So that's why we were first on the block. And I didn't know that because I actually picked Fort Hood when I signed up. And I didn't know that going in. But anyway, so we went to Iraq. We were, 1st Infantry Division was out of Germany. They got there before we did. There was a political game going on, and they were trying to get the 4th Infantry Division into Turkey. And we were going to go south as the 1st Infantry Division came north out of Kuwait. And for whatever reason, they couldn't get it done politically, and so we were about 3 weeks behind the 1st Infantry Division. And then they flew us over. We got to Kuwait. We unloaded all of our vehicles off the naval ship, and we headed in. Our mission was to go meet the 1st Infantry Division in Baghdad. They were approaching Baghdad. They were getting ready to. They'd started from the south and moving north into the country. And so we were supposed to meet them in Baghdad, and here was going to be war. By the time we got everything ready to roll and rolled out, they were in Baghdad fighting. And so we pushed north. It took us several hours to get to Baghdad because we could only run about 35 miles an hour. So it took us several hours to get to Baghdad. Once we got there, it was everything that I remember from watching Desert Storm on TV. There's tanks on fire. During the day, there's people out in the streets and they're waving American flags and they're running beside the road, excited to see the military. And then at night, it's a completely different story. But as we rolled into Baghdad, that was the scene, the Desert Storm, and probably you guys saw some of it from the Iraq War, Afghanistan War on the news. But it was so surreal because it was everything that we had seen, that I had seen before. So I pushed on north. They changed our orders from staying at Baghdad and helping 1st Infantry back to trying to get us up north and then clearing south. So they pushed us all the way up to Tikrit. We were up in Tikrit. We were there for a little over a month, maybe 6 weeks in Tikrit. And by we, I mean just my company of people. Most of my brigade stayed back at Baghdad. But there was a company of people that they pushed on north into Tikrit. We were going to go up and help assist 101st Airborne, who had parachuted into Tikrit. And so they're on foot, carrying all their stuff. So we pushed up to Tikrit with mechanized vehicles to help facilitate them and everything that they did. That's a long story, I'm trying to make short. While we were in Tikrit, we got into a great big gunfight. And while we were there, once we knew there was a gunfight, there was things that we were focused on, you know. And most of the time in Iraq, once bullets started flying, the enemy ran. And this particular house, they were going to clear this house and see if there was anything there, anybody there. And this particular house, they just kept shooting back. Day 1, day 2, day 3. We finally called an airstrike on the house. And when we went in, Saddam's 2 sons were in that house. And so it was surreal. We were like, oh man. And I remember conversations about, listen, we killed Saddam's sons. Things are going to get heated. Things are going to get crazy. We need to be careful, you know. And that was some of what was coming down from our chain of command, to really watch what's going on. So after about 6 weeks, we wound up going back to Tikrit, which was where we were stationed at. For the first about 3 months that we were there, we were sleeping in or on top of our vehicles, in sleeping bags. You know, most of the food that we had was the boxed MRE food for the first, really, about 3 months. Every once in a while, we'd get a hot meal. Whenever we had that raid into Tikrit, one of our lieutenants went and bought a goat from one of the local farmers, and we had a feast that day. We paid for it for about 3 days, but we had a feast that day. So we went back to Tikrit. That became our operating base in Iraq. Tikrit was Saddam's hometown. It was just north of Baghdad. There was a whole lot of stronghold in Tikrit from the military, from the foreign military, and so we spent. There was actually on the outskirts. It was weird because there was a loop that went around it. The main highway that runs north and south in Iraq is called Route 1. Whenever it got to cities, there's a loop that would loop out around so that you could stay on highway speed and go around. So out off of the loop at Tikrit, towards the west side of Tikrit, Saddam had been building what he was calling the 7 palaces of Saddam. And he had 3 of them erected. He had foundations for 2 of them, and he had footings poured for the other 2. So we moved into that facility. There was no windows in it. There was no doors in it. There was concrete floors and brick building that was open. But we actually got to move indoors. You know, we weren't sleeping on tanks anymore. And so now we got the cool army cots that we got to lay out and sleep on. And throughout the rest of the year that we were there, they wound up closing off the windows, closing the doors, putting AC units in there. And so it actually got some form of climate control towards the end of our tour. They put toilets out 100 yards from the buildings that we could use, and a shower facility out there, because we had been using 5-gallon buckets. You know, I mean, just so we wound up setting up at Tikrit, and we stayed there for the remainder of the year. That's where we lived, at the 7 palaces of Saddam. He even had a cathedral mosque, something that he was building back in the way they were kind of like this in a horseshoe pattern, and he had a cathedral that he was having been built, or a mosque or something that was in the early stages that was really neat looking, but it was just concrete. And so we operated out of there. My job in the military, I get asked that a lot of time, my job in the military was a combat engineer. Combat engineer's job is to create or to destroy obstacles for war. So we would create obstacles that the enemy would have to come through or whatever. We would destroy obstacles that the opposing military would set in place to slow us down. We're demolition experts, and so we spent a lot of time blowing stuff up. As a matter of fact, while we were in Iraq, I've lost track, but millions of tons of Iraqi ammunition we blew up for the year that we were there. As we got going in the country, we wound up finding ammo supply points throughout the country. We found 4 of them where they had ammo just stockpiled. Surface-to-air missiles, small arms rounds, even all the way down to just gunpowder. And we went into those ammo points and we began blowing all of that stuff up so that it couldn't be used against us. And we spent about 8 months blowing stuff up. Huge explosions and the whole deal. In December, and I'll finish up with this. In December, actually right after Thanksgiving, they started talking about what was called Operation Red Dawn. I don't know why, but every military operation is called Operation Red Dawn. It just, there's movies about it. That's what our operation was, Operation Red Dawn. The focus of our mission was to go after what we call number 1. Number 1 was Saddam Hussein. And so they had gained intel. We went into country, I think, February. This is December. We had several different opportunities to try to catch Saddam, and we just never could find it. And so this mission was going to start December the 1st, and it was going to go all of the 12th month, or until we found it. And so, and this was kind of the talk right after Thanksgiving. We had a big Thanksgiving meal and everything, and then that's what they kind of started gearing us towards. So starting December 1, we were running 24-hour missions. And the mission would be, the missions were that we were going to go to intel places where people had seen or told us that Saddam had been. And we would go to those places. We'd go to some of them during the day. We'd go to some of them at nighttime. We'd hit 3 or 4 of them at a time in a row. It just different, you vary your strategy based on your defense. And so on December the 13th, we had been running this mission 13 days. And it might have been 4 hours in the morning, go home, come back out in the evening. You may run all day long, go home and eat dinner, catch a couple hours sleep, and then go run all night long. And so on the 13th, we had been, it's either the 12th or the 13th, I don't remember now. We had been going that whole time. And so that night, we had run half the day, 3/4 of the day, and then we went, ate dinner, did what we needed to do, and then we rolled back out at dark. And we were gone most of the evening, and then the next morning, we were gone most of the night. Our mission that particular night, and the missions rolled too. We had a whole bunch of people that were involved, and primarily Delta Force was involved. But the Delta Force would hit the locations, the Special Forces, Army Special Forces. They'd hit the location, and they would usually take a group to support them. And then another group would be, behind the facility that they're getting ready to hit. Another group would be out in front of the facility, and then there would be people that are running patrols on the left and right, if you will. So that particular night, my unit was on the west side of the Tigris River, and they were hitting it on the east side. So we were across the river, and our mission was to patrol the river because the river was right directly behind the place where they were hitting. And we had hit several locations up and down the river that night. And so our mission was, because there was a curfew and nobody was to be out, our mission was that night, if anybody's on the river, shoot to kill. It's probably number 1. And so we're patrolling the river. About 3 o'clock in the morning, we could call on the radio. Operation Red Dawn, stand down. And there's only one reason that they call a mission like that, to stand down. And so we didn't care. We were ready to go home, get some sleep. It'd been a long couple of weeks. And so we went back to our unit, and that night, whenever we got back, our commander said, in the morning, we're gonna go to brigade, first thing, 8 a.m. That was kind of standard, you know, in the morning, we're gonna go to brigade, 8 a.m. That was common language for us. What that meant was have the vehicles ready at 8 a.m., and at some point tomorrow, we're gonna go to brigade. So that particular morning, we got home 3:30, almost 4. That particular morning, we were moving just a little bit slow, you know. But we're getting our vehicles ready to go and everything to go to brigade at 8 a.m. And at 7:55 a.m., all of our command group came out to go to brigade at 8 a.m. And we were like, something's going on. Because that wasn't normal. So we got to brigade, and then again, standard, once we get to brigade, most of us would hang out by the wall that surrounded brigade headquarters as the command went into brigade headquarters to get our orders, to figure out what's going on, to have their meeting, whatever. As we pulled up there, the commander said, come on, you guys are going with us. What that told us, because brigade had internet, so what that told us was we got to go use the internet while they had their meeting. So we kind of got a little bit excited. And we headed that direction. They said, no, we're not doing the internet today. Y'all are coming in to the meeting. And we're like, uh-oh. Because that never happened. This isn't right. And so we moved in, we went in, and as soon as we walked into brigade headquarters, there was a big hallway. Again, one of the palaces of Saddam. There's a big hallway, and as we walked in, there was a wooden bar stool set up against the wall over here. And there's a man sat on that bar stool with a, I call it a pillowcase, I don't know what it's called, over his head, and his handcuff behind him. And I thought, now that's weird. And so as we walked into the hall and everybody got there, they congratulated us on capturing Saddam Hussein. And he was sitting there on that bar stool. Once they congratulated us, they went ahead and took his mask off, showed us that it was in fact him. And then they told us what was going to take place, and I think you guys know the story. He wound up going to court and all that kind of stuff. But that was but we actually got to see him sitting on the bar stool. He was still long hair, still long beard. I mean, skinny from the man that I saw on TV, you know. And he had been on a run for 8 or 9 months, and you know, he had lost a lot of weight, he had grown his beard, he had grown his hair. He didn't look like the same man. But anyway, so we wound up catching. So then after we left brigade headquarters, we went to that house, and we're able to take pictures and stuff of the location and all that. So with that, questions. Anybody have questions? I like to tell everybody that there's not any questions off the table, because some people, they don't want to ask questions.
Did you get pictures of him?
Of Saddam? I did, but I don't have them anymore. I probably have them somewhere, but I don't. I mean, that's one of the things looking back that I wish I would have done, was taken more photos. Most of the photos that I have are of things that I thought was cool while we were over there. That I look back and I'm like, man, I should have taken a whole lot more, you know. But you don't know in the middle of what you're doing that it's going to mean so much later on.
What did he have on?
Yeah, I don't know what the technical term is. We called it a man dress.
Do you have on the white
He had on a
turban or something?
Yeah, that works. Turban. and it come down in the front. It looked like a pillowcase. Come down in the front. And it really wasn't like a great big elaborate one. It was just, you know, kind of laid on the top of his head and had a sash tied around, and it hung down. The reason they wore that stuff was because of the sun. 140 degrees in the shade, and they covered everything up. And it's real thin material, and they would go all the way down to their ankles just to keep the sun off of them.
Did he have anybody when they captured him? Was it just him by
Yes,
himself?
he had one bodyguard with him. When they hit the house, it was a little bitty room. I do have pictures of the room. It was a little bitty room, and it looked like somebody had been laying in the bed over here on this side, and there was food on a cooktop that was, like, it was still cooking when they hit, and that's how they found him. When they actually found him, and you won't hear this from anybody unless they were there, when they actually found him, they disrupted, what we found out later was they had just pulled up at that location and got out, and they were gonna stay the night at that location. And here come the helicopters and everybody. So it's believed that Saddam was resting on the bed, and his bodyguard was cooking. And he was cooking, preparing food for both of them. And when there was a little bitty cellar that was outside that location, literally, it was 18 inches by 18 inches. I couldn't without my vest and stuff, I couldn't go down in that hole because it wasn't wide enough for me to my chest. I wasn't this big, but, you know. But that hole was so small, I couldn't get down in it from my chest. I could get this deep. It went down that far, and then it opened up into what I would call a coffin. It's about 2 foot wide, about 6 or 8 foot long. And that was the hole that he was in. Him and the bodyguard were in there. So they had climbed in that hole, put the lid on, military comes through. They looked for 20 or 30 minutes and never found anything. And they kept going back because there was food cooked on the cooktop and nobody was there. You know, it's just one of those weird things. Where is it? And they were getting ready to leave for the night, and the last 2 guys that were in there found a vent hole for the little cellar. And one of them said to the other one, "Hey, there's a vent hole right here. There's got to be something in the ground." And they went to rustling around in the ground until they found the lid. When they raised the lid off, Saddam Hussein said, as soon as they started pulling the lid off, "I surrender. I surrender." He said, "I'm Saddam Hussein. I'm the man you're looking for. We're coming out. We're unarmed." And they come up out of the hole. They weren't, in fact, unarmed, but they didn't intend to do anything. I think they had a pistol and a rifle in there. They had several $1,000s of Iraqi money, and they had several $1,000s of the United States currency in the hole with them.
So he wanted to live.
Yeah. That's what they told us. As soon as that lid started coming off, "We surrender, we're unarmed," and he was saying it in Arabic and in English. Yes.
It's like the 3rd time I've heard that story, and could listen to it 3 more times.
That's good